Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Build in Digital micro conference on circular construction and digital carbon tracking from embodied to operational net zero. I'm Joe Broon. I'm the Managing Director of Build in Digital and today's host of the meeting. Today, we'll explore how digital technologies are helping the industry move from a traditional build, use, dispose model towards a more circular and transparent approach to construction. Our speakers today will discuss how tools such as BIM, material passports, digital asset management, and emerging platforms for carbon verification are helping organizations better understand embodied and operational carbon across the full life cycle of buildings. We'll also look at how improved supply chain transparency and data sharing can support compliance, material reuse, ESG reporting, and more informed decision-making across the built environment. We now move on to our third and final keynote of today's micro conference. I'm delighted to welcome Doug Johnson, who is Director and Founder of Mesh, talking about turning circularity into action. Over to you, Doug.
Cheers, Joe. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's well. So, in a kind of a similar fashion to Denise, there, I think there's some kind of crossover here. But what I'm particularly interested in talking about is kind of practical action. So we'll finish at the back end of what I'm saying about kind of practical steps and practical tips. But yeah, really, my focus for the next kind of 10 minutes is talking about circularity, reams of data, as we've discussed, a lot of data, even in the simplest building, and then how that manifests itself into meaningful kind of design decisions at kind of any scale. So we have lots of data. Denise mentioned that. There's data pouring out of every known orifice in building and construction nowadays, and it's embodied in kind of operational carbon. Generally speaking, is a fairly new concept to many people. It's easy to when we get specialists kind of talking about circularity and digital passports and stuff, to assume that everybody's a million miles ahead of where you are. That's simply not true. It's a very kind of nascent, young sector and a kind of a long way to go. So we've got this kind of rapidly growing interest in embodied and operational carbon. We're being asked to do more reporting, assessments, compliance is kind of tougher than ever. Rightfully so. The UK has been very slow at kind of playing catch up here. It's a really important issue and topic. And as I say, we're playing catch up. So all of us are learning furiously, professionals included. And so we're expected to do all those things, but a lot of projects, at grassroots level are really struggling to understand carbon, and then let alone actually kind of actively reducing it using the tools and data that they've got available. And what we find certainly is, as energy consultants, I mean, Mesh Energy is a design consultancy. So we're working with architects and design professionals well before planning, helping them with strategic input here, and then kind of doing building services design, a whole load of other things as the project progresses. And as you can well imagine, money is tight at the beginning of projects until we kind of get planning. The problem is, if you leave some of these decisions later, the design is more and more evolved, and you're losing the opportunity to affect that design in its very earliest stages. What we also see is still very siloed working between key professionals within the sector. So we've got architects, contractors, structural engineers, carbon consultants, building physicists, MEP engineers. They're all brilliant, generally speaking, in their own kind of fields. The problem is when we look at embodied carbon in isolation. I mean, let's assume everybody knew about embodied carbon. Even if you're working in isolation, that's as good as useless in many respects. What we tend to see is when people do work in silos and at best pass information in a linear fashion, that often does not lead to success. You often need to get these individuals together as early as possible, sharing ideas, embodied carbon or otherwise, to lead to kind of the greatest levels of success. So what we see today is kind of fragmented information between these kind of silos if people understand it in the first instance, and there's a huge education piece to be done. But proper, true building circularity, when when you look at tracking carbon from its very earliest stages through a building and then into maintenance and ongoing for the life cycle of that building and then decommissioning and recycling of that, relies on this continuity, and the previous speakers have talked about that. But as I say, there's quite a way to go until the masses are doing it. So we understand that it requires kind of traceable information, but it's more than that. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd have this building information management system at the middle, all singing, all dancing. BIM, for I'm sure all the things that it's great at, is often used on very, very big projects, generally speaking. And whilst it can be something incredible, it rarely is. It's often very good for kind of data and kind of design, but not necessarily kind of full like life cycle tracking. And there's a way to go. As I say, people are trying to solve that. And the other thing that we have to bear in mind is people who are sat in offices behind computer screens and data analysts are very, very different from designers, creatives, architects, those working on a building site, those commissioning systems. We all have very, very different complementary talents that have to go into designing, delivering, and maintaining buildings. And so, whilst it's great to think we have a central system, it's those interfaces that many people struggle with, and that's where kind of software has to kind of come into its own. So that visibility is a real issue. And as a couple of the comments have been before, we need to make sure that we're stopping errors creeping in, properly transferable data, and proper kind of project handovers, and hopefully using software to kind of facilitate that and be the single source of truth. So we said in many respects, it's not the data generation. We've seen more and more what we call EPD, so environmental product declarations from manufacturers for materials. You can have data, you can track it to the nearest centimetre around the globe, so you can look at logistics, you can have a look at quantities going into buildings, you can do surveys. But it's the usability of this data that is the crux. The data is only as useful as how you use it, and that's true in any sense. One of the other things we need to consider is clients need to materially. So it's fine talking about designers, but the clients who are actually paying the bills need to materially understand what the commercial implications of this are. You've got people who are designing projects in London, in other areas, other major cities, but other more sensitive projects where embodied carbon and circularity, you can't get away from reporting it. If you don't report it and understand it, the project just simply doesn't get built. So commercial clients are kind of pressured into doing it there. But I think, as with any client buying anything, if they properly understand it and can get behind it, then there's more chance that it will be invested in, and the design teams can kind of succeed. Well, the other thing we also need to understand is there's a lot of slow, clunky, different bits of software. And again, one of the other speakers mentioned that. And what we don't see enough of is this kind of real-time design feedback. In the earliest design stages, we don't see real-time information being shared with the designers to help them with these design decisions. And that's where usability needs to increase as well. That's something I'm particularly passionate about. So I said, in an ideal world, and this is what we're working towards, because this is the right thing to do. We talked about till the cows come home about AI, and you'll hear AI mentioned everywhere. But AI will fundamentally help process this data, whether it's called BIM or something else. We need a central reserve of trusted data through the project phases, and we need to overlay on this, real-time feedback rather than waiting for particular consultants to kind of do their thing and taking days and weeks and taking a long, long time to do this. This needs to become a lot more kind of commercially slick thing to do, and making sure that everybody can plug into it, understand it, and interact with it in their own way. A lot of data manipulation and trust or ultimately the usage of data. Data will only get used for meaningful things if it's trusted. If data is not trusted, it soon kind of withers away, and that's the big kind of trust thing that we need to kind of build in here as well. So last kind of couple of slides, where do we actually start with this? It's fine talking about a kind of a panacea where everything's great and everybody's talking to everybody else and the brilliant data is being shared. But practically not all of us are there. I'm certainly not there, and I expect most of the people on this call aren't here. So one of the things, a couple of suggestions here, kind of auditing what you have. There are EPDs, there are probably data sheets for what you've got. If you're a designer, you've got a CAD model, so there's physical stuff in there. You've got areas, you've got volumes of material. There's numerous kind of calculators and more cost-effective software out there to do an initial kind of embodied carbon study of what you've got. But also from a process point of view, again, think about early stage design where you can make big impacts in design well before it kind of hits site, making sure that embodied carbon and how you use that as kind of gateways to the design process rather than making it like, oh, well, Doug and his team are going to do that. That comes at Reba stage 4. Don't do that. It needs to be a kind of a gateway, and it's easier than you think to get this data if you know kind of what you're doing, and start small, kind of one project at a time. So design stage, supply chain, kind of handover and beyond. We've talked about kind of setting carbon targets. It is really, really key to me that architects and designers and those early stage design teams are working from a single design model and that you get pretty much instant feedback. When you're looking at the supply chain, there's a very good reason why EPD data is used, because there's a huge amount of effort that's gone into analyzing and satisfying the right benchmarks, as they so users can't just kind of come up with any old numbers. It's used for a very, very good reason. And once you've got that data, and again, that's what some of these passports and some of the other software available will allow you to do, is if something materially changes on the project, you should have backup lists or know somebody that's got backup lists of other alternative materials you can use. So it's very, very quick to make alternative purchasing decisions should kind of something change. I'm not going to talk about material passports in any great depth. The guys before me have done that. I guess the final thing that I would say is whatever your BIM model looks like, you need to figure out an effective way of transferring that as a kind of a live asset record to facilities managers and things like that. Again, some of you may be doing that. Some of you may have not the first clue about how you do it, but that's something that you can try if you're kind of more advanced. And so finally, kind of net zero and circularity in a kind of the wider sense will be delivered through better decisions, but only better decisions if they're made earlier on in the project. If you come to this too late, you've lost a huge amount of valuable information. So, digital tools, whichever digital tool you're using, they only matter if they actually influence the project rather than being kind of a vanity thing on the side. The future is proactive, integrated, and transparent, but we can all start today taking small, impactful, and practical steps. That's me done, Joe.
Excellent. Thanks, Doug.
No worries.
I think my key takeaway there, as with a lot of things, is better collaboration between stakeholders.
Yeah,
Ultimately,
absolutely. I mean, collaboration is a big word. I don't know if anybody on the call here was at UK Construction Week. Future Build was on last week out of Excel, and we were talking about collaboration there. A lot of people that I was speaking to were talking about increased levels of collaboration, and I couldn't agree more. It's the UK construction industry is a small world, and it's getting smaller, unfortunately, until things kind of turn our way. But yeah, collaboration between design teams, engineers, software providers is really, really critical. We find ourselves in a place where handing over in a linear fashion, I've done my bit, now Joe does his bit, now Denise does her bit, is not the way to go. We need to sit around a table, get those early stakeholders around there, and figure out the smart way to solve some of these problems, rather than being too, as I say, kind of black and white and linear about the whole thing.
well, that leads to my question, actually, Doug. So what do Mesh do to break down these silos and drive real-time design feedback at the
Yeah, I
earliest
mean, I
project
think
stages?
it at a high level, we strongly encourage sharing what we know. It's a kind of a funny old game in business. There are businesses and stakeholders that you see that hold on to all the information that they have and they possess because they think that's a commercially valuable thing to do. And there are others who will more freely share the information that they have because they understand it's for the greater good. You know, the problem that we're up against here, without getting kind of too spiritual about it, is we the construction or the global issue with carbon reduction, but particularly with UK construction, is we need to learn way quicker than we're learning at the moment. This is for all the things that we say about social media, the network effect is one of the most powerful ways that we can affect a change within the construction sector today by sharing the information that we do. So Mesh make a big deal out of sharing what we know. There's no harm in that, and often wins, paradoxically wins us a lot of business because that builds a huge amount of trust. So, we're more than happy to get round early stages in the project, even though, you might not get fully engaged for months and months and months to come. You're seeding with a project. If you can give a couple of kind of key bits of info to that project just because you're in early doors and understanding it earlier, then why not? For the sake of a meeting, that's just invested time in making sure that project is more successful. So early discussions without necessarily expecting an invoice to kind of come your way, but education is a big part of it.
We've heard from Anastasia about obviously putting things into practice, and
Yep.
I think how do you guys ensure that obviously the carbon circularity intentions are captured during the design stage are actually implemented on site? How do you kind of follow that up?
Sorry, so to be clear on the question, you're trying to figure out, or your question is from design stage, how do you then implement that?
Yes.
Um, you have to. I mean, I say you've got two potential situations here. One is from a kind of being driven stick wise from a kind of a compliance point of view. So you're being forced to design it because the building won't progress unless you meet certain kind of compliance targets. And you can rest assured that if it's compliance, then somebody's going to likely audit it or want to see proof at the end of the project. So again, with that, you have to make sure from a delivery point of view that you've got an engaged main contractor. They understand the severity or the necessity of delivering that. And I think a lot of main contractors and builders are learning the hard way that some of these things are really important. They're not just something that somebody's dreamt up. Like if it doesn't happen, you're putting that entire project at risk, even if it's fantastically constructed. If you don't tick all the boxes, you're not going to get it signed off. And there are certain stages where you get past the point of no return and you can't fix it. So part of it is making properly sure, again, at early stages, when you're talking with those stakeholders and the main contractor and the builders and whoever's bringing the thing to life, that you understand the gravity of some of these things, particularly from a compliance point of view. If you're coming at it from another angle, which is simply, I don't know, let's just take the example that you've got a company and for their brand, and we have seen this, progressive. One of our clients was a like a green investment company, and so when they were doing their new offices, embodied carbon impact was a they weren't being told to do it. It was critical for them for their wider kind of brand recognition and ticking those boxes. So that was in line with what brand was doing. Nobody was smacking them over the head with a stick to tell them to do it. And for that, they were completely bought in, and so they were finding really really engaged builders, architects, design consultants. That they could actively kind of engage with, and they found similarly a great builder that just kind of got it and didn't argue and didn't try and shave every last penny. They realized that's what the client was paying for, and so they work with the right stakeholders to get it done. And in fact, that project, as in increasingly in many, you'll find, we heard about the golden thread through construction. I think, we find projects that the team sticks around with for longer are more successful because you've got that continuity. So we've done the design, then we're working with the builder and assessing kind of as we go along, and it made it dead easy for them because they were just kind of getting on and doing their job. We were getting on and doing our job, and we just agreed what that kind of interface was along the way. So continuity of team helps a great deal. but understanding that some of this stuff isn't just fluff. It's as fundamental as a kind of a structural engineer to making sure this building's successful long term.
Yeah, you have to tell me who this dream builder is.
If I told you, I'd have to kill you, Joe.
We've got another question from Warwick. Thank you, Warwick.
Yeah, so if you look at pension funds, private
Yeah,
equity, now these are the people that are funding probably the people that are building the buildings, and there is fiduciary and financial regulatory pressure on those funders to
yeah,
have ESG reporting. It's now legal in the US and Canada.
yeah. Mhm.
It's going to get tighter and tighter. The building systems that I've viewed today is mostly about what's in the building, but how are we going to all act together to make the carbon attribution, regulatory and audit frameworks far more simpler for everybody and easier to sort of work through rather
Mhm.
than retrospectively trying to spend tens of hours trying to fill out spreadsheets and retrofit them into somebody's model.
Yeah, I mean that again, that's a really good question, and I've got kind of two sides to that answer. One is absolutely, we've seen that in investment funds, where money's flowing from the highest level. We're seeing this being kind of embodied carbon and carbon tracking being a key part of kind of borrowing or them giving money. I mean, we're well aware of banks who are only interested in lending to certain projects that are performing in a certain way, energy efficiency or otherwise. So one thing that we haven't talked about in this is the regulation around embodied carbon. So Part Z is being lobbied for, whilst we've seen Part L of the building regulations around energy efficiency tighten down. We're looking at building fabrics, we're looking at energy usage, heat pumps being used more and more. There's a huge amount of regulation. One thing that hasn't been regulated at the moment is embodied carbon, and that is really the next thing on the list. We've got the Future Home Standard and some updates to Part L, which are just being launched and a change to the government kind of SAP calculation, which will become the home energy model. But embodied carbon is next in the firing line for regulation. So regulation will help. But again, bring it back to a kind of a practical standpoint rather than thinking about what the government might do in 3 to 5 years' time. This fundamentally is about understanding and using the right software and the right teams, understanding and getting this data as early on in the project as possible. When we still have projects, I mean, again, citing the Royal Institute of British Architects, they now, to win awards, you have to report on the embodied carbon impact of that project. You cannot win an award unless that is reported and calculated. Now, there's a huge amount of people that have built houses 3 years ago that haven't thought about embodied carbon and are trying to do it retrospectively. It's always messy when you try and do it retrospectively. It has to be part of the whole process starting from the start. And it's for design teams, software providers, and others, hopefully kind of coming in from outside of the construction industry to figure out how we almost effortlessly integrate this data into programs we're already using or variations without it becoming, a data input problem. This shouldn't be a data input problem. This should be, we've got the data, it's effortlessly flowing in, we trust it, it's auditable. Now, how does that affect a design decision from the very earliest stages? So we have to change process. We haven't got to reinvent the process. We've just got to evolve the process a bit using technology.
Um, I'm glad you mentioned awards, Doug, because that kind of nicely links into my shameless plug for our Building Innovation Awards, which take place on the 29th of September. On the evening of the first day of UK Construction Week, the one in Birmingham, across the road at the NCC, across the road from the NEC. And some of the categories include Best Carbon Reduction Innovation or Practice, best use of data on a construction project, and best use of automation or AI, which I imagine are quite key to some of these initiatives. I have put a link in the chat. Please do check that out. Deadline for entries is the 19th of June. Right, I'm going to just kind of sum up. So we began today's micro conference looking at the building circularity into the DNA of construction with Denise Onar, who is the Chief Growth Officer at EcoWise. Denise highlighted that construction circularity challenge is not a data shortage, but a data fluidity problem. Carbon, material, and compliance data exists, but it's fragmented across dozens of systems and formats. The solution lies in 3 shifts: circulating data freely, ensuring data sovereignty, and adopting permissioned decentralized identity, so the right data reaches the right people at the right time. We then moved on to circular economy in practice with Anastasia Stella, who's the co-founder and CEO of Circuland. Anastasia presented Circuland's building passport system, which tracks materials and products throughout a building's life cycle to enable circular economy practices. The platform creates digital records for new and existing buildings, facilitates material reuse through catalogues that scale from single buildings to portfolios, and streamlines supply chain data collection to improve accuracy over time. We then looked at turning circularity into action with Doug Johnson, director and founder of Mesh. Doug highlighted that embodied and operational carbon remain poorly understood across the industry, with siloed working and late-stage decisions undermining outcomes. Doug emphasized the need for early collaboration, real-time design feedback, trusted data, and practical steps, starting small, using EPDs, and ensuring digital tools genuinely influence projects rather than acting simply as vanity exercises. So, as we've heard today, the industry already has much of the data it needs. The real challenge is connecting it, trusting it, and using it early enough to influence decisions. Whether it's enabling data fluidity across the supply chain, creating digital material passports to support reuse, or embedding carbon thinking into design from day one, the common thread is collaboration and transparency. What's also clear is that circularity and net zero delivery won't be achieved through technology alone. Success depends on practical implementation, trusted information, and ensuring digital tools genuinely shape outcomes rather than simply reporting them after the fact. Hopefully, today's discussion has shown that the opportunity is no longer theoretical. The tools, platforms, and approaches already exist. The challenge now is scaling adoption, breaking down those silos, and turning better data into better decisions across the full life cycle of our buildings and infrastructure. Please join me in thanking Doug, Denise, Anastasia for sharing their insights today. And thanks to you all for joining us for the Building Digital Micro Conference. I hope to see you at a future one. Thank you very much.